I want to introduce you to Michael Rush. He is a author. A Remnant Shall Return is the book that we're going to be discussing today. And it's all about a prophecy of Ezra's eagle. And Michael, I think you are even one of the first to saying, I don't know, this could all be wrong. We won't know until, it's proven right or wrong, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, this, I'd be the first to say I absolutely hope that this is not true.
Me too. But it is pretty fascinating. First, would you explain what the Apocrypha is for people who don't know?
Yeah, absolutely. So the Apocrypha is a list of 14 books, and prior to the turn of the 20th century, the Church of England yanked it from all King James Bibles. But prior to that point, it was included as a supplement between the Old and New Testament from 1611 to just before the 20th century. So, when the Pilgrims came over on the Mayflower, this was included in their Bibles. It's something that, a couple hundred years ago, people were much more familiar with than they are today. Today, most people don't know much about it at all. Also, the Apocrypha, go ahead, Glenn.
Go ahead. No, please.
So one of the reasons that the Apocrypha was pulled out by the Church of England is because it has errors in it. There's some historical inaccuracies and things. So that's one word of caution that should, always accompany anytime you're reading an apocryphal book. It's not included in the canonized scripture for a reason.
Okay. And the book of Ezra is the first book of the Apocrypha, or the first and second book, and it is correct. A cousin or a brother of Daniel. Is that the connection?
So if you look at Ezra and Daniel, these are both people that were taken captive into Babylon when Babylon came in and conquered Jerusalem. So they're brothers in that sense. I don't know that they're related, but they're brothers in that Babylonian captivity sense. Okay.
So there's a couple of reasons why I think people are attracted to end times prophecy. One, because we're commanded to be aware of the signs of the times, so you know what's approaching. But also, I think some people just like to dabble in this because they're looking for a sign that God's aware of the situation and it's explainable on what's going on because the world makes no sense. So they're looking for a connection to God. So you are the only one. This Ezra's eagle was known to be or thought to be Rome for a long time. Is that right?
Correct. Yes, that was the common belief. In fact, they attribute this to the first century AD largely because they thought, well, Ezra's, he's talking about Rome.
Right. But it doesn't really work for Rome. And the only real question I have on this is how you came up with, explain what the eagle is and what the feathers are first, and then we'll talk about how you assigned a date to that.
Okay, so the vision starts with Ezra seeing this large eagle coming up out of the ocean. And the eagle isn't normal. It has 3 heads and 2 massive wings. And on the right wing, it has 14 feathers. And 12 of these feathers are long, and 2 of them are short. And then on the left side, there's just 6 little feathers. And fortunately, Ezra has this angelic guide that's with him, and he kind of points things out to Ezra and explains the meaning. And one of the things that this angelic guide explains to Ezra is that this eagle represents a powerful kingdom that will have global domination in the end times. And he goes on to explain that the feathers on the respective wings represent the leaders of this country. And so there's 20 consecutive leaders, and they serve one after another. So right out of the gate, this is something of a timeline. It's a countdown, beginning with the first feather and going to a big prophetic event that allegedly will take place in the last days.
So it's fascinating to me because what caught my attention was the pegging of those feathers to U.S. presidents is stunning. However, you have to take a leap of faith because it doesn't go all the way back to George Washington. I think you're the only one that has pinned this. Were you the first to come up with this, to pin it to Hoover?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
So
yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So you've pinned it to Hoover as the first feather, and I want you to explain that. But I want to make a disclosure here. This is a part where Michael and I share in our faith. Our faith teaches us that in the end days there will be a secret combination. It will be, basically the deep state, and that kind of sets the clock ticking. And the Book of Mormon is just history, but really an outline of what things are going to look like as we approach the latter days. And it's shockingly accurate to what is happening today. And that's how you came. This is the only Mormon part of it, if I'm not mistaken. You pinning this to Hoover. How did you get there?
So really, it's pinned to Hoover because of the incredibly specific language regarding the second feather in this series. So the verbiage of the prophecies says, paraphrasing it, says that the second leader will serve twice as long as any other leader of this country, and that before the end of his official, administration, none other would be able to serve unto the half of the time that he served. So, that is incredibly specific language. So it was really this that caused me to hone in on Hoover, because there's only one president in the United States that this could possibly be talking about, and it's Franklin D. Roosevelt, who was elected to 4 terms in office. He died of natural causes, in his first or in his 4th term. But Congress passed the 22nd Amendment to the Constitution before his official 4th term concluded, barring all future presidents from serving more than 2 years. So, this is what just locked it in for me, because this is incredibly specific. And so, when you started with FDR and then you go through the feathers, which we will in a second, it is incredibly specific and nails our presidency, the succession of presidents exactly. But also, if I may, it was the Council of Foreign Relations that really, during the Hoover times, that it really took a hold, and that kind of plays a role later in the prophecy when you switch to the other wing, if you will. So explain the feathers and how they are marked for each president and what lines up. Yeah. So that it starts with Herbert Hoover. And, as you mentioned, if you Google, founding members of the Foreign Relation, the Council on Foreign Relations, Herbert Hoover comes up. So that's very interesting in the context of this. And you talked about secret combinations. If you read in the book of Revelation in chapter 17, John sees this amazing vision of the whore of Babylon. And I think that this is what, is the underlining context of what's going on in this vision. It's not so much a vision about these presidents as it is the rise and infiltration of this country by this whore of Babylon. And that's why it starts with Hoover, in my opinion. So then it goes through, there's, as I said, there's 14 feathers on the right side. And, these 14 feathers seem to be counting down. And the specific language of the prophecy gives some other very curious information with regards to two short feathers that would be amongst these 14. And the specific language is that by the time you see the second of these two feathers, you will be approaching the midpoint of this timeline. So when you look at, starting with Herbert Hoover.
It's hard.
Herbert Hoover. And go to the 14th president, it's Barack Obama. So when you look in there for two presidents who were short feathers, meaning in the verbiage of the prophecy, a short feather is someone who has had their administration cut short by contrary or nefarious, means. And I attribute that to the involvement of this whore of Babylon terminating their presidency prematurely. So you look at this list and you go, it jumps right out at you that you've got JFK, who was assassinated, and then you have Richard Nixon, who was forced to resign. Now, as you go through this timeline, Richard Nixon is 45 years into it. And the prophecy again says, when you see the second of these short feathers, you're going to be halfway through this timeline. And then you look at Barack Obama. Well, that was about 43 years later. So that again just matches up perfectly with what Ezra's talking about here. So not only do you have the FDR and these two short. You also have these two short feathers, and it's really hard for me to just kind of brush those things aside and say, this is really just talking about Rome or something else, because it's so applicable to American history. Yeah.
And again, that doesn't mean that it's right. It just means that so far it's nailed everything in the prophecy. But the second part of the prophecy, when you get specifically to Donald Trump and now this administration, and then what happens from here is stunning. And, 5 years ago, I would have said, well, that's going to be hard. I could see all of this happening. I could also see it not happening, but it's not a far stretch to think that these next few feathers, if you will, these next few events that Ezra talks about in the Apocrypha, it's plausible and possible that it comes. We'll get to that here in just a second. More with Michael Rush. We're talking to Michael Rush. He is an author of the book A Remnant Shall Return, which has been out for a long time, but is now starting to sweep, at least in my community in Idaho. And people are talking about it, and they say the same thing. Everybody says, I have no idea if this is real, but it is fascinating how it all lines up. And I really appreciate, Michael, your approach on this, too, that you're saying it could be wrong. I hope it's wrong, but it is interesting to look at. So you get to Barack Obama, and then you start to get up to Donald Trump. And in these feathers that are on this one wing of Ezra's eagle, it's showing all the presidents. And then the last one on one side would be Donald Trump, right?
Correct. So, the first 14 feathers are on the right side of the eagle. And so now Donald Trump is the first feather on the left wing of the eagle. Okay. And all of the feathers on the left side of the eagle have is they are all short. meaning if my interpretation of this is true, that all of their administrations will be cut short by the machinations of this whore of Babylon.
And Donald Trump, you could only say he was cut short if he was to serve 2 terms, and there was nefarious purposes, right? Because he served his whole term.
This is where you have to look at what does it mean to be cut short. Does it mean that you only serve 1 term? Is it referring to the length of in office? And I don't think that that's what defines a short feather, because you have long feather presidents that serve 1 term or 2 terms. I think that the definition of what makes a feather short is whether the deep state terminated their presidency. So when you look at, and again, we're talking about a prophecy that is at least 2,000 years old. So it is so eerie how it mirrors these things. So when you look at
it's now,
go ahead.
Especially, I don't mean to interrupt, but we're going to have to break in a second. Especially, I don't know if you saw the news this week that now they are coming out with the news on Nixon that it looks like the deep state and the CIA actually was responsible for the break-in and the Nixon resignation, that it was actually a deep state operation, and they're responsible for cutting his time short. That news just came out this week. More in just a minute. So 2,000 years ago, there was a prophecy by Ezra. Ezra is mentioned in the... No, he's not. No. Ezra is the first 2 books of the Apocrypha, and he talked about a great empire that is going to be destroyed near the end times. And he describes seeing this empire coming out of the ocean, which is interesting, and it rises out. It has 3 heads, and it has a bunch of feathers on one side and very few feathers on the other side. This lines up now, according to Michael Rush, and I have read this over and over again from a really old copy of the Apocrypha, and it does line up. And if you start with Hoover, it goes and nails FDR. It says they'll be their time in office or in control will be cut short, and that one is JFK and Richard Nixon, and then Donald Trump cut short as well. Now, what happens after that, Michael?
Yeah, so one other thing that I think is important to bring up about this vision is that Ezra heard the eagle speaking, but the voice or the sound wasn't coming from its head, so it was coming from its bowels. And his angelic guide goes, Ezra, did you notice that? Did you notice the voice is coming from this country's bowels? This signifies that this country will be in a period of great distress and at the point of collapse. So that is a very interesting additional background to what we're going to talk about next. So we're now talking about the first short feather on the left side of this eagle, the left wing, which would be the presidency of Donald Trump, which, according to this vision, his presidency would have been cut short. And I believe by the intervention of the Whore of Babylon, or the American deep state. So you have the 2020 election, which, whatever you think, happens there, one thing is for sure, that it was the most, contested election in probably American history. You had over 10% of states send alternate delegates to the Electoral College. That's never happened at that scope before. And their explanation, they said that there was widespread fraud in their states. So it's if you just go at face value, he served 4 terms, that's it, this prophecy is fake, okay. But if you look at it from that perspective, then you'd have to say, okay, Trump was a short feather because this election, there was something, not right with it, and it was stolen.
You could even not use the election, but you could talk about how he had been thwarted the entire time by the deep state and even COVID, that he didn't accomplish all of the things that he was set to accomplish because of the interference of the deep state. So you could read it that way as well. But, I hate to make, let's not water this down even more. If it's accurate, we'll see, because what happens next?
So next, again, we have some very specific language here. It says that the next short feather, which would have to be Joe Biden, says that his time in office, he's away even faster than Trump was. So when you're looking at current events, right now, this is very timely. Right, there are many people that think, Joe Biden hasn't been calling the shots for a long time. Right. So it's just very curious. But then the very next thing that it says is that there will be two short feathers that think in their hearts to be set up. So they're just thinking about it. In my mind, this means they want to be the president, but they are not set up. So we could be talking about an election scenario here. And in that case, you'd be talking about Kamala and Trump again. And the specific verbiage is that as they are so thinking in their hearts, the three heads of the eagle awake and devour them. And then they take control of the country from that point forward. And
so does this have to happen before January 20th?
Well, so January 20th would be when you would swear in the next president of the United States. So for Biden to be away sooner than Trump, then if Biden completes this, then I don't know how you could say on its face that this prophecy is correct.
Right.
Again, this is from the Apocrypha.
Right.
But how it lines up is astounding.
Pretty remarkable.
Yeah,
however,
really is.
Like you just said, we're going to know one way or another if Joe Biden doesn't make it to the 20th. That's a point, I guess, in its favor. I hate to say, it's a really bad thing, because then the next thing, and do they serve or not? So this would have to happen before a swearing in too, where the deep state would devour those two, right? Correct.
So basically, what this prophecy, if it's real, what it is saying is that whoever wins the election will not be set up as president. They will be devoured. Something will happen. What that is, I don't know. If this is true, we'll know when it happens. But it will put the three heads of this, said another way, the leadership of this deep state will now be calling the shots overtly.
Known to everyone.
Known, yeah. There are no more masks. They're not operating behind the scenes.
Okay, so now if you thought that was a trip to Funland, wait until you hear what happens with the heads of the eagle.
Yeah. So the first head, the angel, Ezra's angelic guide, says this first angel dies with great pain in his bed. And then the head on the left rules this country and then is killed by the head on the right, who is then killed himself. And the prophecy said, you'll recall that there were 6 short feathers on the left side. So far, we've only talked about 4 of them, Trump, Biden, and then the 2 presidential hopefuls. So those are taken out, and there's 2 left. Well, in the prophecy, in this vision, Ezra saw that these 2 last feathers went and came right underneath the right head of the eagle. And as soon as that head is gone, then they are in control of this country. And when that happens, and the prophecy speaks as if they are in control of the country together. And then you have this big lion that comes out of the woods from nowhere and confronts these 2 leaders of this country and refers to them as, it specifically says, "Are thou all that is left of the 4th beast?" Now, what are we to understand from the 4th beast? Specifically, this angelic guide tells Ezra that the things that he's seen in this vision were seen by his brother Daniel, but they weren't expounded to him the way that they're being expounded to Ezra. So Daniel receives this vision of, basically from, the king of Babylon to the last days. He sees that there will be 4 incredibly powerful countries that dominate the earth. And the last of these countries is this 4th beast. And this is what this lion seems to be accusing these last 2 short feathers of being. And then it specifically says that it, takes them in judgment alive. And if you read in the book of Revelation in the 19th chapter, this is an epic chapter where, Christ comes back for the second coming. He's riding down to save the Jews in Jerusalem who have just been surrounded by, the opposing forces. All the nations of the earth are just trying to wipe them off the map. And Christ returns. And there are, in that chapter, there are 2 prominent leaders that are leading all of these armies, and they're referred to as a false prophet and as the beast. And in that chapter, Christ takes those 2 alive and casts them into a lake of fire. So I believe that is what you are seeing Ezra talking about. These last 2 leaders would be equivalent to this false prophet that is spoken of so often in the writings of John the Revelator. Specifically, he starts talking about him in Revelations 13 as rising to power and overcoming the saints and all nations becoming subject to his rule, and that he is given tremendous power to do miracles in the eyes of all people. And, he deceives the nations, and, Christians have no answer for what he's doing. It doesn't make any sense. And, faith is collapsing. And then John says something very curious. He says, "This is the patience of the saints. Those who live by the sword will die by it." And he says that just, after he said that this false prophet is going to overcome the saints. So this is, this is all tied together with this vision of Ezra's eagle. At least I believe that it is.
Michael, I'd like to have you for a podcast because we're out of time and there's just so much to understand on this. But we will have a pretty good idea by January 20th. Whether or not. How do you feel about it?
It's hard. I think that Americans all over, regardless of what they think of this prophecy, that probably most of them never even heard of it. That's fine. I think that most people are waking up to the fact that something isn't right. This isn't normal. There's some malevolent force behind the curtain that we can't really see. And more and more people are waking up to that, even though and it's frustrating because you don't quite know what you can do against it. And
so
let
me
go ahead,
Michael, real quick, because I'm way out of time. But he should live by the sword, die for the sword. That is the way I would interpret that, is that you're not to raise a sword against this beast.
That's right. I mean, what did Christ tell us to do? He said, you turn the other cheek. You don't return railing for a railing. In other words, you don't use your guns and ammo to blast yourself and save yourself and your family. You rely on your faith. I think spiritual preparations will be by far the most powerful of any that you can make if this is true.
Well, for a long time, I have said you have to be so close to the Spirit that when this time comes, you'll be able to, it'll just say to you, stop, turn around, go the other direction. And you will, because you've listened and obeyed enough. Michael, I appreciate it. It's fascinating. Again, don't know if it's true, but it is truly fascinating. Let's pray that it's not. You bet. Michael Rush, A Remnant Shall Return is the name of the book. Back in a minute. All of this could have been nonsense and just a fun exercise. It also... we're going to know pretty soon. It also could be a sign of the times. And you could see, imagine if the election is in dispute and we're going back and forth, and God forbid, do not pick up a sword or you'll die by the sword. But, there's some sort of, real civil unrest. President Biden is out. You could see somebody who is trusted. I don't know who that could be, but somebody who's part of the deep state that is trusted by a vast majority of people stand up and say, look, the president's dead. This is in dispute. I'm just taking control here until we settle things down. You could, hopefully it's not real. It's not going to happen, but it is possible.
Glenn Beck Program.